The room was alive, but not in a cheerful way. It was alive with pressure. You could almost feel it in the air, heavy, thick, impossible to ignore. The cameras were already rolling, lights burning down from above, and an audience waiting for something to happen. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they knew this wouldn't be an ordinary discussion. 3 women stood in that spotlight, and they couldn't have been more different. On the left stood Ivanka Trump. She carried herself the way she always did, perfectly polished. Her hair, her outfit, her smile, everything carefully arranged as if every detail had been rehearsed. To many, she looked like the ideal first daughter, confident and calm. But beneath the perfect smile, there was always a question. Was this confidence real or just a mask? On the right was Melania Trump. She didn't need to say a word to draw attention. She had that quiet presence, that distant elegance that made people look twice. But her silence often spoke louder than her voice. Some saw dignity in her quiet, others saw coldness. Tonight her stillness would be tested, and then, between them, stood Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't polished in the way Ivanka was. She wasn't reserved in the way Melania was. Jasmine's power wasn't in silence or image. It was in her voice, her stance, and her unshakable energy. She walked in with a different kind of confidence, one that came from being tested in the fire of debate, one that came from refusing to back down, no matter who stood in front of her. That difference was clear. And everyone watching could feel it, because here was the reality. Ivanka and Melania had always been seen as Trump's 2 queens, the ones who stood beside him at rallies, posed beside him in photographs, smiled through controversies. They were symbols of his empire, each in their own way. For years they had been untouchable. But Jasmine wasn't walking into that room to play along. She wasn't there to admire their crowns. She was there to test them, to pull away the surface and see what was underneath. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension before a single word had been spoken. It was like waiting for a storm. You don't know when the first strike of lightning will hit, but you know it's coming. Ivanka adjusted her notes, giving one more flawless smile to the crowd. Melania folded her hands in her lap, eyes scanning but unreadable. Trump himself sat further back, his expression tight, watching his 2 strongest symbols prepare for what was ahead. And Jasmine? She didn't need notes. She didn't need a rehearsed smile. She had walked in with something else entirely. Sharp focus and the kind of determination that makes people lean forward without even realizing it. The stage wasn't just set for a discussion. It was set for a clash of appearances versus reality, of silence versus truth, of privilege versus accountability. And the most dangerous part for Ivanka and Melania was this. They didn't know when Jasmine would strike. They didn't know what angle she would take. They didn't know which one of them she would target first. Would she cut through Ivanka's polished answers? Would she expose Melania's cold silence? Or would she take them both down at once? The audience didn't blink. The cameras didn't move. Every second felt longer than the last, because when 3 women with this much weight walk onto the same stage, it's never just words that are exchanged. It's power, and power always shifts. The crowns Ivanka and Melania had worn for so long were gleaming under the bright lights. For those same lights were about to expose every crack. And Jasmine Crockett, she was ready to bring the hammer down. The storm hadn't hit yet, but everyone in that room knew when it did, it would change everything. The silence before the storm is always the most dangerous. And that's exactly how it felt as Ivanka began to speak. She did what she always does. Calm voice, perfect tone, the kind of delivery that had been practiced 1,000 times. She spoke about vision, about stability, about how her role was to support and to guide. Her words were smooth, almost too smooth, like a melody played on repeat. For a moment it looked like Ivanka might take control of the stage. That polished confidence was her weapon, and she was using it well. Her eyes scanned the audience as if she already knew she had their approval. But Jasmine Crockett was watching closely. She wasn't moved by the smiles. She wasn't swayed by the polished lines. She could see straight through it, and then Jasmine leaned forward, just slightly. But that movement alone shifted the entire energy in the room. The audience sensed it before she even opened her mouth. Something sharp was coming. Her question landed like thunder. Who are you really representing? The people, or just your father's name? The words cut through the polished tone like a knife through glass. The air changed instantly. Ivanka froze for half a second. The smile didn't fit anymore. Her eyes flickered, searching for the perfect answer. But in that silence, so brief yet so loud, everything changed. The audience caught it. That hesitation. That moment where the mask cracked. And once you see a crack, you can't unsee it. Jasmine saw it too. And she didn't stop. She pressed harder, her voice steady, her tone sharp but not loud. She spoke of real people. People struggling, people who didn't have luxury or wealth. People who needed leaders who understood them. And then she pointed at Ivanka. Not with her finger, but with her words. You speak of power. You speak of success. But where are the words for them? The ones outside your father's circle? The audience stirred. You could hear the shift, the coughs, the whispers, the weight of realization. Ivanka's words, polished as they were, suddenly felt empty. Melania leaned forward now. She hadn't spoken yet, but she wasn't about to let Ivanka drown. Her voice came out calm, controlled, softer than her husband's, but steady. She spoke of loyalty, of family, of the strength that comes from standing together through storms. For a moment, her calmness almost worked. The room seemed to breathe again. Melania had a way of using silence as strength, and she was playing that card now. But Jasmine wasn't distracted. She turned her gaze to Melania with the same piercing focus she had given Ivanka. And her words landed even harder. And you, Melania, you've stood by every decision. You've had the stage, the eyes, the voice. But tell me, when did you ever use it for the people who don't have your privilege? The crowd gasped. It was the kind of moment that doesn't just make you listen, it makes you lean forward in disbelief. 2 questions. 2 strikes, both aimed with precision. Ivanka's face was tight now. Melania's calm expression flickered. Trump, sitting in the back, shifted uncomfortably. And Jasmine? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her hands. She didn't need to. Her control came from the weight of her words. From the way silence followed her every line. Ivanka tried to step back in, but her voice wasn't the same. The rhythm was broken. The confidence was shaken. Melania, too, seemed quieter now, her words less steady. Because in less than a minute, Jasmine Crockett had done something no one expected. She had stripped away the comfort of rehearsed lines and elegant silence. She had pulled both Ivanka and Melania into the spotlight, not as queens, not as symbols, but as women who suddenly looked exposed, and the audience knew. This was just the beginning. The storm had only begun to break. The first strikes had landed. The calm surface Ivanka and Melania tried to hold on to was slipping fast. But tension doesn't just appear, it grows, it spreads, and soon the whole room could feel it. Ivanka leaned forward again, this time more forceful. Her voice, once smooth and elegant, carried an edge. She wanted to reclaim control, to show she wasn't rattled. She spoke about her years beside her father, about her efforts in the spotlight, about being more than just a daughter in the shadows of power. But the words didn't feel as strong as they once did. Because now, after Jasmine's strike, every sentence sounded like defense, and the more you defend, the more people wonder what you're hiding. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. She stood still, letting Ivanka speak, letting the tension thicken, letting the audience hear every attempt to rebuild confidence. Then when Ivanka paused for air, Jasmine's response dropped heavy. So all of that, was it for America? Or just to protect your father's throne? The silence that followed was colder than before. Ivanka's lips tightened. She blinked, searching for a clever turn of phrase, but clever words don't land well when someone has already cut straight to the truth. Melania shifted in her seat. This time she stepped in quickly as if to shield Ivanka. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, reminding the room of dignity, unity, family values. She painted the picture of standing strong against critics, of keeping faith during storms. It was the kind of answer designed to restore balance, to steady the moment. But Jasmine leaned slightly closer, her voice even sharper than before. Loyalty is easy when the price is paid by others. Tell me, when has loyalty ever cost you something real? That question didn't just hang in the air, it burned. Melania's face remained poised, but the tension was clear in her eyes. She was used to speaking rarely and carefully, but Jasmine had forced her to stand exposed, right there in front of everyone. The audience's attention shifted like a tide. Their eyes weren't on Jasmine, they were on Ivanka and Melania, waiting to see if their masks would hold or shatter completely. Trump himself shifted again in the background. He had always been the center of the storm, but now it was his wife and daughter who were caught in the eye of it. And Jasmine Crockett was the one holding the lightning. And Jasmine wasn't done. Her tone grew firmer, her rhythm sharper. She didn't just ask questions. She told stories. Stories of families struggling with bills, of people who couldn't afford the luxury of silence or rehearsed answers. Every example she painted widened the gap between her and the two women sitting across from her. Each word dragged the contrast into the light. Jasmine standing for the people without power. Ivanka and Melania standing only for the empire they belonged to. Ivanka tried again, but her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. Melania's responses grew shorter, colder, no longer polished but defensive. They were slipping, and everyone could see it. The air in the room grew thick, almost unbearable. The cameras captured every glance, every twitch of discomfort. The storm Jasmine had started wasn't just shaking their image. It was tearing through it piece by piece. And yet Jasmine didn't look angry. She didn't look desperate. She looked calm, steady, in control, like someone who knew exactly where this was heading because this wasn't the climax. This was only the build, and the real blow was still waiting. By now, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Ivanka's polish was cracked. Melania's calm was shaken. And yet both women still tried to hold their ground. After all, they weren't just speaking for themselves. They were defending the image of Trump's empire. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't walked into that room to trade soft words. She came to put an end to the performance. And the moment had finally arrived. Ivanka tried once more to reclaim control. Her voice carried urgency now, not confidence. She spoke quickly about achievements, about her role in shaping ideas, about standing as a strong figure beside her father. The words sounded powerful on paper, but in the room they felt hollow, because every sentence now seemed like it was built to protect a fragile throne. Melania followed. Her tone, still calm, turned colder than before. She spoke of loyalty, tradition, and respect. She wanted to remind people of strength, of dignity, but the longer she spoke, the more it felt like distance instead of strength. And Jasmine just stood there, waiting, letting them both play out their last cards. When the silence finally came, Jasmine leaned into the microphone. Her voice dropped lower, slower, more deliberate. And in that pause, the weight of the moment locked everyone's eyes on her. You both speak of crowns and loyalty. But let's ask the real question. When has either of you carried the weight of this country on your shoulders? When has sacrifice ever touched your life? The words echoed like thunder. Ivanka's mouth opened, but no words came. Melania's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet. The silence wasn't strength this time. It was surrender. Jasmine pressed forward, her tone sharper with each line. The people you claim to stand for, they wake up worried about rent, about food, about whether their kids will have a future. And yet here you stand, polished and perfect, speaking of loyalty only to one man, Donald Trump. The audience shifted, the weight of the words pulling them deeper. Jasmine's voice rose just enough, not shouting but commanding. So let's be clear. This is not about queens. This is not about crowns. This is about accountability, and neither of you have carried it. Not once, that was the strike. The words hit harder than anything before. Ivanka's face flushed, her eyes darting like she was searching for an escape. Melania's stillness broke. Her hand tightened against the table, her lips pressing into a thin line. Trump himself shifted again in the back, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Jasmine like he had never seen this storm coming. The audience was silent. Not because they didn't understand, but because they understood too well. The image of Trump's two queens, long untouchable, was breaking apart right in front of them. And Jasmine didn't stop there. She gave the final cut, her words slow, deliberate, undeniable. America doesn't need crowns. It needs truth. And tonight, your crowns just fell, the crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads, stunned by what they had just heard. Ivanka sat frozen. Melania lowered her gaze. And for the first time it was clear. They weren't in control. Jasmine was. The stage didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to her. The final blow had been delivered and nothing could undo it. The final blow had landed. And for a moment the entire room seemed frozen in time. The cameras were still rolling, the lights still burning bright, but all attention stayed fixed on the three women at the center. Jasmine stood steady, her words still hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. Ivanka sat rigid, her eyes locked on the table in front of her. Melania didn't move, her silence now looking less like power and more like defeat. Even Donald Trump, sitting a few rows back, had shifted into stillness. His arms were crossed, his face tight, his jaw stiff. For once, he wasn't the center of attention. He wasn't even part of the moment. His daughter and his wife, his two queens, had been stripped of their crowns right in front of him. And there was nothing he could do. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They didn't make a sound. Instead, they sat in silence, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on them. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't spectacle. It was something far heavier. Jasmine Crockett stood alone in that silence, and that in itself was the point. She had walked into the storm, faced two of the most untouchable figures in Trump's world, and left standing taller than either of them. Finally, Ivanka raised her head. She forced a smile, small, shaky, nothing like the polished grin she had worn at the start. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. The audience watched as she closed her mouth again, swallowed hard, and lowered her gaze back to the floor. Melania didn't even attempt a response. Her stillness, once seen as dignity, now looked like surrender. The calm mask had shattered under the weight of Jasmine's words. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply let the silence speak for her. That silence was louder than any victory speech could have been. After a few long seconds, Jasmine finally spoke one last time. Her voice was calm, steady, final. America deserves more than crowns. It deserves courage. It deserves truth. And that truth will always stand taller than any title. Then she stepped back, her eyes steady, her presence unshaken. The audience finally breathed. Some nodded slowly. Others whispered to each other. But all of them knew. They had just witnessed something they wouldn't forget, because this wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a moment where power shifted, where illusions cracked, where truth stood taller than privilege. Trump's empire had always looked untouchable, always polished, always rehearsed. But tonight, in less than a single minute, Jasmine Crockett had pulled back the curtain. Ivanka and Melania, long seen as the faces of control, now sat exposed. And Trump himself, watching from the shadows, had been forced to see what happens when loyalty and image collide with truth that refuses to bow. The aftermath wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with shouting or chaos. It was quiet, heavy, permanent, because once you see the cracks in a crown, you can never unsee them. And as Jasmine Crockett walked away from that stage, the message was clear. The crowns had fallen, the spell had broken, and in the end, truth had won,